Hi everyone, so welcome to the Bridge Cultures, and today's presentation is going to be about Australia and its Holokarma. So just a few things I'd like to mention before we get started. If anyone would like to make a comment, please feel free at any time. If you have a question or a doubt, or if you want to say something, please feel free to give this information. And you can write a comment in the text box if you don't already know, or you can speak on the audio. Okay. So I think that's about it. We're going to give a presentation. I'm going to give a presentation for about an hour and a quarter, and then at the end I'm going to do an energetic exercise. Okay. And yes, and just a little bit about me. So I've been a volunteer of Conscientiology since 2007, and I found Conscientiology in Australia. So there was an office there at the time, and became very interested in the subject and decided I would like to become a volunteer. And since then I've been volunteering and how can I say, being very interested in the ideas and researching about the ideas and so on. And in 2014 I immigrated from Australia to Brazil, here in Foz, Cognopolis, and I've been here since then, been living here. So, I have a background in urban design, but I currently work as a teacher here in Brazil. So it's interesting, like having lived in another place and being able to see certain things about your own culture, which maybe you didn't necessarily see previously. So having living here in Brazil has helped me a lot to understand my own culture. So, just a little bit of background information about the Bridge Cultures. So it's a project from Isaac International Interassistential Services for the Internationalization of Conscientiology. And basically this is a project for those people who are new and are only seeing this presentation for the first time. It's a project that facilitates the sharing of knowledge about different cultures between intimists around the world. And so far we've had 9 lectures, diverse group of different cultures, different countries around the world. And I will be the second last, and then we'll have one more. Okay. Yes, for this year at least. Next year, there'll be more coming. So with this presentation, I'm going to cover the following things. So first I'll give some general facts about Australia. Then I'll give just a brief background or history about Australia. Then I will look at the strong traits and weak traits that I see as being part of the Australian Holothosene. And of course, when I'm talking about this, if you have any knowledge about Australia, or you've visited there, or you've lived there, please feel free to offer your opinion or your insight, your ideas, because of course these are also my opinions, based on what I researched, but also my own opinion. So feel free to contribute if you agree or you don't. And then I'm going to look at the holokarmic debts and responsibilities of the nation itself, okay? And then some challenges for the intimissivist who was born there or goes to live there, some of the challenges that they can face and that can maybe cause some issues for them in following their extension program. Okay, so let's begin. So Australia. And yeah, just to let you know, there's the monitor, Virginia, who's going to be helping out today. Okay, so some general facts about Australia. It's a relatively small population in Australia, considering the size of the country. So the size of the country is huge, right? I think it's the 6th largest size in the world. I'm going to show some facts about that in a bit. But yeah, the population is 24.6 million, with Sydney being the largest city with 4.92 million. So most people, they live concentrated in the cities and around the periphery, mostly on the east coast of Australia, some on the west coast, but yeah, concentrated more on the coastal areas. And this is because Australia, basically the entire middle section is desert. It's very dry, and it's yeah, a lot of deserts. So the place where most people can live, have good quality of life is in those areas. Then the main language is English, official language, and is spoken by 95% of the population. Having said that, because it's a very multicultural, immigrant-based country, there's many other languages spoken as well, but English is the main language that is spoken. Then we have the religion. It's a highly yeah, Christian-based society. At least its roots are in Christianity. So 52.14% of people say that Christianity is their religion, with and there's a mixture of Anglican Catholics at 36%. And then, but it's interesting to note that actually there's a high number of people that state that they're not religious at all. So 29, almost 30% of people say that. So Australia is recognised as being a fairly secular country. And even the people that state that, you know, their religion, it's not so strongly religious as in other countries. The currency, we use the Australian dollar. I've got an image of the different currency, the notes that we use, so you can see it's quite colourful. And the capital, I was going to ask you, everyone, you know, what do you think the capital is? But it's there on the slide. But yeah, many people think it's Sydney, but in actual fact, it's Canberra. Canberra is a planned city, and it's kind of in a centrally located area between the two biggest cities, Sydney and Melbourne. So yeah, that's the capital. Then we have the political system. We have a constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy. And as I will speak a bit about it later, we are, even though we're independent from Britain, we still have connections there, and we still see the Queen as being our, yeah, the figurehead, yeah, even if it's a symbolic thing, right? And also we're part of the Commonwealth, so a series of nations that had a connection to the British monarchy in the past. Then our national colours are green and gold, and the reasons for these colours, it's because of our national floral emblem, the golden wattle, okay, which has these colours. I don't know if you can see in the image, but it's actually the wattle, that's the flower that's showing behind the emu and the kangaroo, which is the national animals, okay. All right, let's keep going. So the name Australia, I thought it was interesting to mention. Where does it come from? It comes from the Latin word australis, which means southern, okay, because Australia is located in the southern hemisphere. Originally, it was known as New Holland, okay, and as we'll see in the history, it was because the Dutch were the first ones to actually, first Europeans to actually find Australia. But then it was later changed to Australia. Land size, as I said, is huge. 6th largest country in the world after Brazil. and it's 7.69 million square kilometres. Okay, it's also known as the largest island in the world. However, it's the smallest continent in the world. Okay, so it's interesting. These things. Okay, so then we have the geography. So the eastern coast of Australia has the greatest levels of rainfall and temperate forests. And so this is where most people live because of this. And yeah, most of the country is desert or semi-arid. Having the largest number of deserts in the world, 10 of them in the one continent. Okay. So, and the animals and plants, this is something that usually kind of calls people's attention, right? There's kind of different exotic kind of animals. And yeah, a lot of the animals you can only find them there. It's specific to the country. And Australia is known as having the largest number of plant species in the world, 25,000. That is currently, that's known. And I'm sure more to come, and 120 types of unique marsupials, which includes the kangaroo and the koala, and it's also the home to the mono trees. And these are animals that lay eggs and suckle their young at the same time. So these egg-laying mammals. And so you can see a picture here. We have the echidna, okay, which is with the kind of the fur, the kind of pointy things jutting out, and then you've got the platypus, okay? So kind of, for us, it's very normal to see these animals, but for people who've never seen them before, it can be, yeah, quite strange. Okay, I thought I would just put this slide here just to kind of give a brief introduction to the Holothosene of Australia, because it's our national anthem, but I never really looked at the anthem and noticed what was written, but I realized there's quite a few things that you could pick out that really reflect our cultural Holothosene. This idea of the country being young and free, right? We're a young nation, right? And free, this idea of freedom. It's a value that's very strong within Australia. This idea of this golden soil and worth for toil. Immediately, after the convicts came and, after this kind of more sordid period, we should call it, and free settlers started to arrive, people noticed this big difference in their quality of life. Coming from like very poor areas in London or Ireland or Scotland, and coming and then having kind of this abundance. You had to work hard for it, but if you did work hard, you would be able to receive a lot in return. And so this kind of name at some point caught on, Australia being the lucky country. Yes, our home is girt by sea, nature's gifts, okay? This idea of nature, this is very strong as well, this idea of this value of nature. And especially, I mean, for people who live in Australia on the eastern coast specifically, it's a close connection with the nature. Just toiling with hearts and hands. I put here shared responsibility, like everyone banding together, right, to make something good happen. And who've come across the seas. This is kind of showing that Australia is a nation built from immigrants, okay? So this idea of immigrants being the building blocks of Australia. This idea of, it's a place which has lots of opportunities, where it says to share, there's lots of opportunities, and people who come, they can, have a good life and share in what Australia has to offer. So it's showing this openness as well to other people. And finally, courage. Courage is this, I think, a lot of the people that came to Australia, they needed to have this quality. I think, throughout the history. It was based on immigrants that came. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into, and they, you know, they had this adventurous spirit, and they were going to a new country to make a new life. And yeah, and it's kind of this courage is a quality that I think is valued and shared by a lot of Australians. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. Okay, history at a glance. Quick look at history. So basically, we need to consider that the first Australians were the Aborigines, and the Aborigines, they've been living on the continent in Australia for a very, very long period of time. Okay, at least 80,000 years ago, they were known to have travelled to Australia and set up their home there. And of course, the Aboriginal population was very sparsely populated across the continent, okay? But they became very attuned with the land. They knew how to live with the land, especially in the more arid parts, more dry parts, and they had a very good relationship with the land. And in 1606, so I mentioned this kind of name change from New Holland to Australia. So the Dutch explorer first came to Australia. It's known that other people came in the past from other countries, but the first European came in 1606. Okay, but in 1788, this was a very significant date for Australia, for everyone involved, the Aborigines and for the migrants that landed in Australia, because this was the date when the first fleet arrived, okay? So the first fleet was basically the first ship which brought over the criminals from England, okay? And they were deported, okay, to live in a penal colony, okay? So basically the first Australians or European Australians to arrive were criminals. So we have this nice history, right? But yeah, so it's interesting how that influenced the culture, right? Now I'll talk a little bit about how that influenced. So it's basically about 160,000 convicts came, okay, over a number of years until 1868, when Britain stopped sending convicts to Australia. And it was a very, very harsh life at the beginning, okay? They were treated very poorly, very badly. But at some point, if a convict acted well over a certain period of time, they were given leave and they could become a free citizen, okay? And so this is what a lot of people sought out. And in fact, what was observed was that when they were given their freedom, and because there was opportunities to work and to do well, a lot of people really wanted to, how can I say, they wanted to lead a good life. They wanted to, they didn't want, you know, they weren't interested in being criminals at all. So it is the vast majority of people, they were very interested in keeping, because of their past, their bad past, they wanted to kind of create a clean slate and do well, right? And act well. So this was observed with a lot of the ex-convicts. Yes, you have a question.
You said that the same applies to Brazil because of convicts.
Yes.
It's just a comment.
Okay, yes. I think a lot of colonized countries, right? They have a similar history in the beginning. Yeah.
But I think that all makes, I think, the difference when you talk about, you know, Holokarma of nations. So
yes.
It is this base, I don't know.
Yes.
It's something to reflect on. Just
for sure, exactly. And something, you know, Holokarma with the nation that settles, right? For Brazil, it's, I guess, with the Portuguese. For Australia, it's with the British, and what's the connection there as well. But yes, with the whole colonization process as a whole, what's, you know, the karmic connections. It's interesting. So?
Because the convicts, the Portuguese convicts were always sent to Macau, not to Brazil.
Okay, Liliana's making a comment that most of them, or all of them? Most of the so Liliana was making a comment that most of the convicts were sent to Macau, a Portuguese colony, and China, Macau in China. Exactly. So, but okay. Let's see here. Where am I up to? Okay. So in from 1793 to 1850, so shortly after 1788, free convicts started to arrive, okay? And most of them came from England, from Scotland, from Ireland. So this is our heritage in Australia. And for a number of years, it was people coming only from these countries, okay? And then from 1851 to 1893, we have a significant period, which I felt I should mention, was the gold rush, okay? It happened in a number of countries around about the same time, but it created an immense pool. A lot of, you know, with the convicts, it was kind of, they were forced to come here. But then with this gold rush, it had this pool where a lot of people came from, with the, you know, from their own will, you know, their own interests. They came to Australia to seek gold, to make a better life for themselves. And so around 300,000 people migrated from various countries to Australia. And it significantly changed Australia, okay? Brought a lot of wealth into the country, and there was a lot of development at this time. And of course, a lot of different migrants came as well. Migrants came from different parts of Europe and the United States, and from China even. And it's interesting because you know, this conflicts, some conflicts started to emerge at this point, and it later it led to some policies being enacted in Australia, some not very nice policies, but we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so which had an influence on the Holokarma, should I say. And then in 1868, Great Britain stopped sending convicts to Australia. Okay. In 1901, Australia becomes a federation. Okay, so before then it was self-governing colonies. I think I have an image of the flag here. Okay, so it was different colonies. You can see the different lines, the different colours of Australia. In 1901, all the colonies got together, they united, and they became a federation. Okay, and so this was very important. The Constitution was written up, let's see, let's go back. And they united to form the Commonwealth of Australia. At this point, they're still under the governing body of Britain, okay? So in 1902, this is a significant date, I should mention, because women are given the right to vote. The men actually received the right to vote in the 1850s, so 50 years earlier, but 1902, because it's, I think, the second country after New Zealand who gave women the right to vote. And I think this is actually a legacy of the convict society. It's one of the strong traits that I observed in Australia, which is this idea of egalitarianism. And it's not just with the men, it's also with the different genders. It reaches into different areas with the woman, with different cultures later on, at least. But yeah, it's a woman, especially in Australia and also New Zealand, it was a little bit more advanced in terms of how they treated women. In 1942, Australia joins the Commonwealth of Nations, the former colony of the British Empire, okay? In 1966, I mentioned about a policy that was kind of negative towards immigrants, and this was known as the Australia-wide policy. The Australia-wide policy was something which didn't allow people who didn't have a white colour skin to migrate to Australia. And this was partly because of the immigrants that had arrived earlier during the gold rush and the problems that had occurred, the racism, right, and the prejudice. And Australia was worried that too many people, different people would enter. So they created a policy so that, you know, only immigrants from, you know, from England, Ireland, Scotland, these sorts of countries would immigrate, okay, to Australia. And this was in place for a long time, at least from 1901 until 1966, okay, so it was a while. It started to be relaxed after World War II, okay, but officially this policy ended in 1966, okay, because after the Second World War, Australia felt a very strong need to receive more immigrants. It was basically, if we don't populate the country, we're not going to survive as a country. This was the idea. They realized that we needed more people. There was just a strong shortage of people. So to overcome this issue, they realized they need to relax, you know, who they allow into the country. And basically they began to allow people, different immigrants from, you know, they expanded their borders, okay, to immigrants from other countries. In 1967, so 1966, 67, there was quite a few changes, and the right to vote is given to Aborigines. So again, and I'm going to talk about this group in the Holokarmic section, but this is a group where Australia has Holokarmic deaths. And only in 1967 were the Aborigines given the right to vote. And you can see here an image of people celebrating, right? So even while the rest of Australians are enjoying like a high quality of life, still there's a great level of disadvantage for the Aborigines. Okay. In 1986, it comes at a late date, right? But in 1986, this was when Australia becomes fully independent from the UK. Okay, so it only happens in 1986. However, Australia still recognises the British monarch as the head of the state. Okay, so there's a very strong link between Australians and the British. Okay, and you can see, you know, that only in 1986, right, that this happened. There's this separation, this more strong separation happened. Yeah, so that was 1986. Yes, and I did want to mention there was a referendum maybe 10 years ago where we would stop recognising the British monarch as the head of state, and the majority, and this was a referendum, right? The people of Australia voted, and there was still a majority of them, even though it was a slight majority more, a majority of them wanted to keep the British monarch as the head of state. Okay, so you can see that there is still a very strong connection to Britain and British monarchy. And Lillian has a question. Do you think you could ask in the audio? Although
I just wanted to add that it's funny how young people in the UK, when they go in the gap year before university, many of them go to Australia. That's what they want to do, to spend a year in Australia, right?
yeah,
They feel very, it's like going home at the same time.
yes, exactly. So it's interesting, even though Australia has it's different. It's a different country, okay? The climate's different from Britain. There's a number of things that are different from Britain, but the architecture is very similar, especially the older architecture, right, from 100 years ago. For me, I feel like Australia is more closer to Britain, even though there's a strong American influence from the United States influence. It's kind of like a mixture, but I would still say there's a stronger influence from Britain. And yes, and what Liliana said is correct. There's a strong cultural exchange between people, right? As well as people coming from Britain, there's a lot of people that migrate to the UK or go to stay there for years or even to live, okay? And currently 1 in 4 Australians are born overseas, okay? So really a large number of migrants, and more people are coming. And so, for example, in Sydney, like I went there 2 years ago, and I was very surprised by the large number of Chinese migrants or migrants from, you know, the Asian world, and also the Indian immigrants, but more from the China and Japan and Southeast Asia. And yeah, sometimes you would only see these populations, and it really, and it shows, and this is another thing that I want to touch on, what's the karmic debt with these groups, okay? So quality of life in Australia, and I would like to mention that when I'm talking about quality of life, I'm talking about it's excluding the Aboriginal population, because the Aboriginal population has a significantly lower quality of life, okay? Even though they are a minority, I think 3% of Australians are Aborigines, but the quality of life is different. Even though the government is taking steps to try to improve quality of life, there's still a long way to go. The high level of poverty, things like that. Okay, so the quality of life for the average person. So based on a number of factors, Australia is rated very highly in the world for quality of life. For example, it's the first for the happiest developed nation in the Better Life Index. So people don't just have a high quality of life, they recognize, or they appreciate their life. They're comfortable with their life and like what they have. And yeah, so this organisation for the Economic Cooperation Development rated Australia for the happiest developed nation. Of course, this is one rating. Other ratings will put other countries in different rankings, but it's still significant. And the second for quality of life in the Human Development Report by the UN. So this is based on 3 factors. I think it was economic, it was based on education and life expectancy, okay, which is a little bit higher. So the economic, Australians earn on average a high salary. Okay, you can see $58,618. Of course, for men, it's a little bit higher than women, but the minimum wage is $19.49 per hour. Okay, so it is high. So it means that the average Australian, even the poorest people in Australia, they still have a good quality of life because of these government benefits, right? They're earning the minimum wage. And based on the population size, it has a high GDP, a gross domestic product of that they're able to gain. For the political aspect, it's, you know, it's a highly efficient government, right? It uses the money well and efficiently to provide this good quality of life for people. And there's a high voter turnout, okay? Even though it's not voluntary, right? We need to vote, but still, a lot of people are very politically aware, they're educated, and they know what's going on, and they hold the government accountable, okay? So it seems to be quite a high level of transparency with the government. And with the education, People are educated, higher level of literacy, 99%. And for example, anyone, who's able to get into university can go, because the government will provide a non-interest loan, an interest-free loan, and they only need to pay it back when they're earning a certain salary, a certain level of salary. And then only a small percentage is deducted, okay? So it makes it very feasible for people to go to university and to become better educated. And in terms of health, it's understood that the life expectancy is 2 years above the UN average, okay? So 82 years, okay? And the healthcare system is good. So some people, they don't need to get private healthcare because, for example, there's a friend of mine, she had a baby, and she was saying how in having the baby and the whole service, all the services that were provided, it was like as good as the private healthcare, if not better. So it's very good. Okay, coming to the Holothosene of Australia. Okay, so as I just mentioned, the high quality of life. I think this is one of the strong traits of Australia. This is what makes a lot of people want to come to Australia to live. Okay, I didn't mention, but even though most of the middle section of Australia is kind of arid and desert, on the coast where most people live, the climate's really nice. There's a lot of beaches, beautiful beaches, and this is another aspect, right? People enjoy the nature, and a lot of outdoor activities, a lot of, and free things to do, and so people have a good life here. Another aspect is this level of safety as well. It's safe to be outside at night time in the suburbs, at least, or at night in the city. For example, people this is something that I noticed coming from Brazil, okay? So living in Brazil, we don't have that level of safety, so it becomes even more obvious when I go to Australia. And for example, Babu, my husband, he commented how it was amazing we could walk out at night, to go for a walk, in the suburbs, and there's no issue. Then we have egalitarianism, okay? I mentioned this before. It's one of the really strong traits of Australians, okay? People, even though, of course, what happens in practice, but people, and you have hierarchies, of course, but people strive to have this egalitarianism. Like, for example, in the business setting, in like an office, if you have a boss, you're able to just easily walk into their room, hey, and call them by their first name, and and talk to them. And there's not that kind of level of hierarchy. It's more of an equal relationship. And people don't like to see themselves as better than others. There's a level of modesty there. But yes, yes, Marcelo, you'd like to say something?
Yes, I'd like to make a quick question, okay?
Sure,
considering this egalitarian profile, okay, what would be the exactly reason why you have such a difference in the wages between men and women? Okay, would be more related to the type of professions that the people choose, or is that something that some kind of gap that still needs to be closed?
You know what, I have a feeling there's a little bit of that with the gap, but I think it's more the fact with the lifestyle. I think a lot of women who decide not like to have children, and so they work part-time, and I think that's one of the factors. And also, yes, in terms of CEOs, I think there are more men or in leadership positions, right? I think there's still more men than women in the leadership positions. And yeah, there is the idea of the glass ceiling that exists still. But yeah, so that may have answered your question. But in terms of egalitarianism, yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting point that you raised. But Australians like to see themselves as being egalitarian. Okay. For example, I know that, like, in terms of independence, like, women, like, are seen as very capable and independent and go and do their own thing. Like, and this is one of the differences that I see, like, for example, in Brazil, there's a little bit more machoism, right? And in Australia, it's kind of, it's not tolerated so much, like, in terms of how we treat women and things like that. So, but yeah, it exists. The disparities exist. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so of course, this egalitarianism, it's an ideal to aspire towards. Okay, so in practice, there are certain things that it's not equal. Another aspect is non-religious. Okay, we have people that are religious, we will have all of that, but I guess because it doesn't have, it's a relatively new country in terms of European civilization, and it just doesn't have that kind of historical, traditional, conforming kind of Holothosene behind it. And of course, I think there's a mixture of Protestants and Catholic people here as well. It's not so strongly Catholic. And it's just, it's more of a secular society. People are more focused on more of a scientific approach, and are less religious. Okay, so people, they celebrate all the festivals, the Christmas, Easter, but there's not that level of, how can I say, attendance in the church and things like that. And related to that is an energetically lighter Holothosene. Just because we just don't have the, the level of European civilization, that history, right? And so a lot of people comment when they arrive in Australia, they feel this lightness, right? And it's something, and one of the facts is we've never experienced any wars in Australia. And because it was, colonized 200 years ago. So all of these factors, I think, contribute to this kind of fresher, lighter Holothosene. Volunteerism. Okay, so there's a large number of people that volunteer. Okay, and I'll talk about that later on. And mateship. Okay, so this is something. It's something that people pride themselves on. It came from a more of a masculine culture, like in the wars and also the convicts and things like that. And kind of this idea that you do anything to help your mate, right? If this person's your mate, then you protect them, you look after them, and from this is kind of come this overall like idea of friendship, right? So, and it's not just for men, women are called mates, and, you hear a lot of this, hi mates, and this mateship, right? And then another aspect is the environmental consciousness, okay? Of course, Australia is doing a lot of things polluting, and a lot of industries which are polluting. I'm going to come to that, but in terms of the overall consciousness of the citizens, of the people themselves, there is more of a level of consciousness. Also because we can't treat, there's an issue with droughts, and we need to kind of preserve the water. And from this came, being careful with how much water you use. It's people are careful to use the water, and also with the nature. Like for example, in the suburb that I lived in, you weren't allowed to cut down trees, and there is this sense of common ownership. With we need to protect the green areas, the nature, okay, for everyone's benefit. And I see this more Australia's more people focused, and I say this because, for example, there's a lot of areas where, like, especially in Sydney and in the bigger cities, like a lot of areas that are dedicated to the citizens, right, just for free, and anyone's able to access these areas like on the water, you know, usually where people would build their house, that they keep those areas preserved and reserved just for people to go and enjoy things. And so, yeah, I see this level of people focused and this idea of people from any status or socioeconomic group can have access to, you know, the good things. Okay, so now coming to the weak traits related to the Holothosene of Australia. So one of the biggest things is this idea of alcoholism, and this is one of those legacies that comes from the British culture, exactly, from the UK, right? People like to drink. It's you know, for me, when I used to drink a little bit when I was younger, but when I decided I would stop, I just wasn't interested anymore. And I said that to people would just look at you strangely, like, what, why? I don't get it, you know? So, and they would try and wonder why don't you drink, you know? Is it religious factors? They were curious. So it's something that's just normal, everyone does it, and we have a high level of binge drinking, okay? So this drinking to excess, drinking until you're completely inebriated, right? Yes. And so this is one thing which is a problem, okay? And it's a big problem in society. They're starting to tackle it a little bit, but it's still so ingrained in the culture that it's a problem. And then and also this idea of alcoholism linked to fun, to socializing. And so, you know, it's just always connected together. You're gonna socialize, you're gonna have a drink. So, you know, if there's no drinks, there's no fun. This is how they see things. Materialism, this is something I put here, both economic and physical. Yeah, for example, economic, like especially in Sydney, this is, I guess, more so in Sydney, in some of the other cities less so. But in Sydney, people are very interested in, you know, making money, working hard, and, you know, having a good life from those, you know, those things that you reaped, right? Sorry, those things that you sowed and then you reaped from them, okay? So this is one thing. Another thing is this physical materialism, because the physical materialism is more, it's kind of like a spiritual vacuum, right? I kind of see it, or a multidimensional vacuum. When I first heard about, it's just not spoken. You just don't hear about these things related to multidimensionality. You don't hear it in the newspapers and TV, rarely, very rarely, and kind of in a very questioning kind of, you know, suspicious way. For example, yeah, when I first heard about astral travel or these things, or out-of-body experience, back then, this is the concept I heard of astral travel, I was like, how come, you know, no one ever told me about this? I feel like my whole life, never heard these things, never heard these concepts. And so it's just, yeah, it's difficult in terms of that. The culture of excess. So Australians, they like to work hard, they like to live hard, and they like to party hard. Okay, you can see the image there. This is Australians having fun. But it's, of course, having fun is great sometimes, but they kind of, I see they take it to the excess, okay? They take it a little bit beyond, you know, maybe what they should. And then connected with this is the weekend culture, okay? So a lot of Australians on the weekend, They just want to relax, they go to the beaches, have barbecues, you know, the focus is just enjoying life for that weekend, okay? And again, a little bit of that, and you know, within the limits is great, but again, it's this excess, okay? Always this standard kind of pattern rather than, okay. So then we have another weak trait of the Holothosene of Australia is this mono-language, okay? And for a long time, Australia was kind of, you need to embrace our style of life, okay? You need to learn the language English, you need to adopt our lifestyle, okay? And this is the Australian way of life, okay? So everyone else, the migrants that come, they're not Australian, okay? So there's that reference of what is Australian. And of course that's changing over time, but I had a friend, for example, who was Lebanese, born in Australia, and yet she didn't see herself as Australian. So she compared herself to how can I say, typically blonde, blue-eyed, you know, from the English, Irish descendants, right? And I think a lot of people, a lot of immigrants might see it in a similar way. But of course, she was one person, maybe others would see it less, but there is a little bit of that happening. And related to that is this idea of mono-language, okay? Sports, heavily invested in sports. Australians, a lot of Australians are rugby mad, or, you know, they love, or cricket, they love cricket. There's another Australian sport, it's very strong. Gambling is another thing, which is very strong in the Australian culture, and it's causing a lot of problems. Another thing is bureaucracy and high regulation, okay? So Australia is efficient, okay, but it's sometimes the bureaucracy gets in the way, okay? They're trying to streamline things a little bit, so it's helping, but I think they still have some way to go. For example, if you want to build a house, even for little details, you need to, you know, send it to the planning council where they need to approve it, and sometimes it can take a while. So it's just, yeah, there is a high level of regulation. Then we have this isolation, okay? Australia, because the Australian continent is not connected with, like, by land to any other country. And it is kind of far away from Europe and from South America, kind of, we're always seen as being on the other side of the world. And down under, but yes, that's more in the south and then over to the right. So we're down, but where we are, we're in a central location in Australia, right? So it's all about reference. But there is this, I think, this slight disconnection because of that from other parts of the world. There's a question.
When we have these cultures that are in islands in the UK, they also feel the same, because they say the continentals, you know, is like the foreigners, and we are not Europeans, we are English, right?
Yes.
We are,
Yes.
because they're also in silence, right? So there's this,
But
connection.
they didn't connect with people from China or...
Yeah, no, they are.
We are.
They connect, and over time they're creating more connections with people from, you know, especially the Southeast Asia, from the Philippines. These are countries that are close by, right? But again, I still see that there is that kind of slight disconnection. Yes.
I have a question. In the very down there about mono language, in the education, do you study another language? For example, another French in your school.
Mm-hmm. That if we could learn other languages, yes. Well, can we turn? Sorry. Yeah, thanks. It's interesting because I went to a language school, so I don't know if it's how can I say, so much in other schools in Australia. But for example, we had the opportunity to learn, lots of different languages. And they were even offering Hebrew, which but yeah, so it was different. But and they do learn, and Chinese is quite common for people to learn. But even still, it never gets to the point where it's a language that is spoken in society. And that's what I mean by mono language. It's not accepted to speak in any other language. Like people speak with themselves in other languages. It's not about that, but it's about what is recognized as being the main language, for example, in shops or in the government or on TV or in...
There are no
No, just English. No other dialects besides English. Of course, the Aborigines, yes, but it never, how can I say, there's always those people who, because there was many different dialects with the Aborigines, but there was always a few people that interacted with them, would learn the language, but it never actually entered into society, right? And in actual fact, only 3% of Aborigines exist, and most of the Aborigines, they don't live in the main cities. Either they'll live on the fringes, or they'll live in settlements which were set aside for them, or in certain areas outside of the big cities. So yeah, there's not a lot of interaction, especially in the big cities, and because of that, and also, yeah, like mentioning about the Aborigines, what was I going to say? At the beginning, when the convicts first came to Australia, most of them died at that point. It was the smallpox, by disease, just because of the contact. They never, for how many thousands of years, they never had contact with other people, other groups of people. And then they came into contact with, you know, the Europeans, and and it was pretty bad at the time. And either that, or there's massacres that happened, and yeah. It's a very sore point from the Aborigines, like, you know, when the Europeans came. And there's still a lot of resentment. You hear them, and this is something that holokarmically the Australia needs to work at reconciling. This is one of those issues, and there was other things that the Australians did as well. It's interesting to note at the beginning there was kind of friendly relations, maybe pseudo-friendly relations between the Europeans that came and the Aborigines. There was even a picture of them dancing together, like when they first made contact, and certain members of the Aboriginal community interacting with the groups, right? But there was always that very high level of, you know, superiority, and in actual fact, they saw Australia, when they came to Australia, the idea was they should try and make friendly relationships with the Aborigines. They actually had this order to try and create friendly relationships, but with the idea, with the plan to take over Australia. So how could that ever work? It's a sense of, you know, white superiority, and the idea of this idea of terra nullius. Terra nullius was a concept that they implanted, which was the land didn't belong to anyone. It's interesting. So they implemented this idea, and so that the Aborigines didn't own any of the land. When they arrived, it didn't belong to anyone, and so they could take whatever they wanted. So there was this. So yes, it kind of went off track what I was saying, but it's interesting to mention that because I think it's important to understand, this relationship. So yes, leading into this, okay, so one of the debts that Australia has is specifically with the Aboriginals. And another thing that happened was that from 1910 to sorry, it's not 1920. I think it's the 1960s or 1970s. So it's more than 10 years. It's about 50 years at least. They implemented this this policy where they wanted the rest of the Aboriginal population, they wanted to kind of assimilate them. They wanted them to kind of blend in to the Australian population. Okay, so how did they do this? They took the children away from their parents. They forcibly removed the children and put them into the families, into white families, okay, for them to raise and things like that. And this created a huge kind of trauma for the Aboriginal group. And this happened for a number of years, okay? So this happened, and of course also the deaths with police brutality, and how can I say, a consequence, right, of the actions that they did with the Aboriginals and their current state to now, okay? Yes, so it's, the Aborigines are in not all of them, there's some that have made a success and have integrated well into Australian society, but you have a lot of them that are kind of separate, they stay within their group and they're still, highly disadvantaged, okay? And they have big problems with alcohol, with sexual abuse, with criminality, okay? On the plus side, because I put here debts and surpluses, okay? So while this was going on the other hand, it did enable a large number of Australians, or how can I say, people that came from other countries, to come to Australia and to have a new lease of life, to have opportunities that they never had before, it could have been better circumstances, of course, but at the same time, you can't, how can I say, for a large number of people, I think karmically speaking, it improved, their direction. They moved to a different level in terms of their opportunities. And especially in Britain at the time, back at the beginning of Australian settlements, hundreds of thousands of poor people were able to migrate from Britain to Australia, okay, and significantly improve their quality of life. One thing in regards to the Aborigines, because there are some things that the government is trying to do to mediate the problems, is this formal apology of Australian Aborigines, okay? In 2008, the government, through the then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, he formally apologised to the Aborigines. And this was something really big at the time, okay? It never had happened before. And it just, I think it helped to resolve a few things, this reconciliation, maybe pave the way for certain other things to come. There was also certain different legislation that was passed to enable Aborigines to claim land, okay, starting in 1993, and it overruled this concept of terra nullius, okay, so this idea of the land belonging to no one. And of course it's continuing, right? More and more land rights, but it's a slow process. And, let's see in the future what's going to happen. But yes, Australian people, they have a huge debt with the Aborigines, and it's going to take a while, even though they've done something, it's going to take a while for them to clean those debts. In terms of wars and other conflicts, Australians, in the 200 years, they've been involved in 13 wars because of their close connection with Britain, with the US. They support them, so whichever, whatever wars they go into, Australia is, right behind them. So this is an issue, right? But and they do spend a lot on military spending, but not as much as the US, but still quite a lot. However, at the same time, Australia has never actually experienced a civil war any uprising, any coup, you know, within its borders, within its territory. And I think this also contributes to this kind of lighter Holothosene, okay, because of that. In terms of migration,
is the only country that hasn't experienced civil war.
oh, yeah. Anna was asking, is it the only country that has not experienced a civil war within its borders? I don't know. I think it's one of the few that haven't, but yeah, it's rare. Yeah, exactly. And then, yes, so Anna's going to maybe check that data. Okay, so in terms of migration, so yeah, one of the issues that there is a strict quota, okay, so they only permit certain types of people to come into the country. It was a bit more relaxed earlier, but they allow certain types of professionals to come through, you know, have a certain professional background, and therefore they prevent other people from accessing the opportunities of migrating to Australia. So there are other people that would like to migrate, but it's not possible. And then, but in terms of surpluses, yeah, we're a nation built on migrants. So 64% of the population is due to migration. But because of, on the one hand, you have this selectivity, okay, but you know, that's a problem. But on the other hand, because of this selectivity, you know, where they only allow certain types of people to come into the country, it does, how can I say, create a society where there are lower levels of crime, of poverty, right? And so the people that live in the country do enjoy a higher quality of life. So yeah, there's kind of two sides to it, right? I'm just going to quickly go through this because we don't have much time. I think it's including the energetic workout, or yes, okay. So let's just quickly go through this. Yeah, there's problems with the silent seekers, so they don't always allow people to come in, especially there's people from the nearby, like Philippines or from other countries, Southeast Asia, that try to get through by illegal means because, you know, they're trying to get away from some problems. But, and yeah, there's a kind of a dispute about some of them are treated well, but others have been sent to camps and isolated and had problems. However, 800,000 refugees from displaced countries, you know, war-torn countries have come to Australia to migrate. Okay, so you know, from different parts of the world where there was problems. So this is a good thing. In terms of China and India, I think there is a, how can I say, there's some debts to pay in relation to China and India. And I think this is a consequence of the actions that the British Empire did in the past, right? And Australia's connection with Britain and the debts that Australia's paying as connected with this overall Greater Britain, right? This connection. So by allowing a greater percentage of Chinese immigrants and Indian immigrants to immigrate to Australia, I think this is, in a way, maybe helping to pay some debts. So, yeah, because they are the highest percentage of immigrants that are coming to Australia, right? From China, 651,000, and from India, 592,000. So they're the highest levels of all immigrant communities. And in terms of mining, most of the GDP of Australia's, you know, most money comes from mining. Okay, so I think this is an environmental concern, right? And but on the other hand, is contributed to the well-being of the country. And so coming to my hypothesis about, you know, the debts and surpluses of Australia, where does Australia lie as a nation? What is Australia's holokarmic account? I see that they are in the recomposition phase, okay? I consider that based on the fact, yes, they do have lots of debts to pay, but I think they're in a position based on their high quality of life that they can give more. They can, you know, they're not so much victims themselves, but they're in a position where they can assist others, right? And just the fact that it's estimated in 2017, the research showed that 40% of the Australian population aged 15 and above participate in voluntary work. Okay, a lot of people are volunteering, and I think this is saying a lot about maybe where Australia's at, okay, related to the recomposition phase.
It's also coming from the European culture.
Yes. It's also, okay, so Liliana's saying it's maybe also an aspect of the UK culture, the influence, right? But I know that, for example, with it's called the Rural Fire Service, because basically the people in we have huge problems with droughts and flood, so how can I say, bushfires. We have a huge problem with bushfires, okay? And especially in the rural communities and in all the cities, right, and the towns in Australia. And there's an organisation which is based on volunteers, which help to fight the fires and kind of protect the communities and things like that. And it's a huge organisation based on volunteers. It's actually seen as one of the biggest in the world because, and it shows that volunteering capacity of people. Okay. All right. And finally, just to finish, some challenges for intermissivists. Okay, so some things that I've already touched on, but I'll just re-emphasize. I think this aspect of, it's a society that's secular, but at the same time follows very strongly this conventional science, okay, conventional scientific paradigm. And I think, yeah, this can be a problem in terms of an intermissivist who's looking for things which can help them to enter more into understand more about multidimensionality and, you know, investigate all those things and do their Proexis, right? Their existential program. So I think this is one of the issues. Another thing is the good life, okay? So an intermissivist, it's very strong within the culture, and a person who is inclined a little bit in that direction will, how can I say, and they will enter into that more easily. This idea of, you know, drinking alcohol and also just enjoying what Sydney has to offer, what Australia has to offer as a whole, because it's, you know, it has a lot of things to offer, and if you're not careful, you forget about the things that you need to do, right? Sports and drinking, again, I mentioned that, but yes, sports, very strong with the sports culture. And yes, marriage and children is still, even with all this, you know, this egalitarianism and things like that, it's women, they will marry at a much later age and have children at a later age, maybe like right at the end, 35 on average. And this is, you know, across the board. But at the same time, they will end up marrying. And so there's a still idea of having this white wedding, you know, kind of fairy tale wedding, and having children, an expensive wedding. Okay, so any questions? So if there's no questions, I'm going to finish off here. So next month, on the 24th of November, okay, at the same time, 1 p.m, the next presenter will be Jeffrey Lloyd, okay, and he'll be presenting New Zealand, okay, which is a neighbouring country of Australia, as you guys probably know, but quite different. Similarities, but different. And so that's the end. Thank you. And I guess now we're going to do an energetic exercise, okay? So if you're at home, I would advise you, when we're doing energetic exercise, to see that no one's going to distract you. Maybe, yeah, close the door. And then just get comfortable in your seats. Okay, so maybe start with taking a deep breath in. And then slowly exhale. Relaxing all the muscles of your body. And then focusing the energy at the top of your head. Concentrating the energy there. And bringing that energy down the body slowly until reaching your feet. And then bringing the energy back up the body through all the chakras, until reaching the top of your head. Continue moving the energy down and up the body at your own rhythm. Circulating the energy. And gradually increase the speed and the intensity of the movement. Continue to accelerate the movement. Applying your will. And continue until reaching the vibrational state. Continue at the same intensity for a while. And now begin to expand the energies to the surrounding environments, sending out your best energies. Applying your willpower to strongly send your energies out. Continue this movement.
Hello, Jacqueline.
Flavia, could you turn your audio off just for a moment? We're just doing an energetic exercise. Okay, continue this movement, exteriorizing the energy out. Maintain your focus. And now bring the energy in. Draw the energy in from the surrounding environment. Continue for a little moment more, just to bring the energies in. And slow this movement down. And stop. And begin to slowly move your fingers, your toes. And opening your eyes. Okay, is everyone okay? Yes? Good. Hello, Flavio. Okay, so we're at the end of the presentation. Thank you everyone for your participation. I've left on the last slide some sources if anyone's interested in knowing a little bit more about Australia. And that's it, so thank you.
Thank you.